Restoration period. The restoration of the Stuart monarchy in the kingdoms of England, Scotland, and Ireland occurred in 1660, marking the return of King Charles II from exile in continental Europe. This period followed the Protectorate and the Civil Wars, which collectively became known as the Interregnum. The term restoration also encompasses the years following the establishment of a new political order. It is frequently used to describe the entire reign of King Charles II and often includes the brief reign of his younger brother, King James II. In certain contexts, it may even extend to cover the reigns of later Stuart monarchs up to the death of Queen Anne and the accession of Hanoverian King George I in 1714. For example, Restoration comedy typically includes works written as late as 1710. Restoration literature refers to English literature produced after the monarchy was restored in 1660 following the Commonwealth period. Some literary historians define this period within the reign of Charles II, while others extend it to include the writings from James II's reign. There is also a tendency to consider literature from the 1690s as part of the Restoration era. However, by this time, the reign of William III and Mary II had begun, characterized by a more restrained, Protestant, and pious cultural ethos compared to the libertine spirit of court life during Charles II's rule. During the Restoration period, various modern literary forms, including the novel, biography, history, travel writing, and journalism, gained prominence. This era saw the influence of new scientific discoveries, philosophical ideas, and contemporary social and economic factors on literature. The Restoration period witnessed a significant outpouring of pamphlet literature, often with politico religious themes. John Bunyan's renowned allegory, Pilgrim's Progress, also emerged during this time. Some of the finest poetry, notably by John Dryden, a prominent literary figure of his era in both poetry and prose, the Earl of Rochester, Samuel Butler, and John Oldham, had a satirical nature. This satirical tradition laid the foundation for the later accomplishments of Alexander Pope, Jonathan Swift, and John Gay during the Augustan Age. Above all, the Restoration era was a golden age of drama. Heroic plays influenced by French neoclassical principles gained popularity. However, the era is chiefly remembered for its brilliant comedies of manners, which offered critical social commentary. Playwrights such as George Etheridge, William Wycherley, Sir John Vanbrugh, and William Congreve excelled in this genre, shaping the theatrical landscape of the time. Charles II. In 1649, the execution of Charles I deeply shocked the Scots. While England transitioned into a republic, they declared Charles I, his son, as king and invited him to Scotland. Agreeing to the Presbyterian demand of signing the National Covenant, he complied. However, Oliver Cromwell's forces marched north, defeated the Scots at the Battle of Dunbar in 1650, capturing parts of southern Scotland and seizing the nation's public records. Nevertheless, the honours of Scotland, the Scottish regalia, remained elusive. On January 1, 1651, Charles II was crowned in Scone, marking the last coronation there. In July, the English army ventured into Fife, captured Perth, while the Scottish forces invaded England. This resulted in their defeat at the Battle of Worcester on September 3, 1651. Charles II managed to escape and sought refuge in France. Meanwhile, the English continued their campaign, capturing Stirling and Dundee. By October 1, 1651, Scottish resistance effectively ceased, and the English government declared the Union of England and Scotland. Although the Acts of Union were not enacted until 1657, Scotland's representation in Parliament was inadequate, and only 2 Scots were included in the Council of State formed in 1655. The resulting administrative and legal system proved efficient but financially devastating. Legislation favored the English, and ecclesiastical divisions persisted. Charles II spent the next 9 years in exile until his invitation and restoration to the throne in London in 1660. He held a strong aversion to his time in Scotland, where Presbyterians constantly lectured him on morality and asserted that kings were subject to God like everyone else. Consequently, he had no desire to return north. Instead, he delegated the enforcement of his policies of royal absolutism in church and state to his Secretary of State, John, Duke of Lauderdale. The reintroduction of bishops into the Church of Scotland led to objections from the Covenanters, resulting in the Penland Rising of 1666, which they lost at the Battle of Rouillon Green near Edinburgh. Despite Lauderdale's conciliatory efforts, another Covenanting uprising was crushed by the king's illegitimate son, the Duke of Monmouth, at the Battle of Bothwell Bridge in Lanarkshire on June 22, 1679. The growing opposition to Lauderdale's corrupt government eventually led to his downfall the following year. The latter part of Charles II's reign was marked by attempts to resolve religious discord. Since he had no legitimate heirs, he was aware of Scotland's unease regarding the prospect of his Roman Catholic brother James succeeding him. Charles II passed away after a stroke in 1685, leaving the succession issue unresolved. James II. In 1669, James converted to Catholicism. Despite his conversion, he peacefully ascended the throne at the age of 51. His position was formidable, with standing armies of nearly 20,000 men in his realms and a revenue of around 2 million euros. Shortly after taking the throne, James announced the summoning of Parliament in May but issued a warning stating that meeting often depended on being treated well. A rebellion led by Charles II's illegitimate son, the Duke of Monmouth, was swiftly quelled after the Battle of Sedgemoor in 1685. The infamous Lord Chief Justice, Judge Jeffreys, presided over the brutal punishments during the bloody assizes. James reacted to the Monmouth rebellion by planning to expand the standing army and appoint loyal Catholic officers. This, along with James's efforts to grant civic equality to Catholic and Protestant dissenters, stirred conflict within Parliament. Many viewed this as James favoring Catholics. Widespread fear of Catholicism, exacerbated by Louis XIV's revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1685, which protected French Protestants, and concerns about a standing army led by Catholic officers sparked protests in Parliament. Consequently, James prorogued Parliament in 1685 and ruled without it. James aimed to advance the Catholic cause by dismissing judges and Lord Lieutenants who opposed the repeal of laws penalizing religious dissidents. He appointed Catholics to significant academic, military, and political roles. Within 3 years, a majority of his subjects had become alienated. In 1687, James issued the Declaration of Indulgence promoting religious toleration. 7 bishops who requested a reconsideration were charged with seditious libel but were later acquitted, earning Anglican praise. When his second Catholic wife, Mary of Modena, gave birth to a son in 1688, James Stuart, later known as the Old Pretender, it seemed that a Catholic dynasty was on the horizon. William of Orange, James's Protestant son-in-law, married to James's elder daughter Mary, invaded on November 5, 1688. The army and navy, despite James' investments, deserted to William. James fled to France. His attempt to regain the throne with the French army in Ireland failed, culminating in his defeat at the Battle of the Boyne in 1690. He spent the rest of his life in exile in France, passing away there in 1701. The Glorious Revolution. The Glorious Revolution of November 1688 saw the deposition of James II and VII, who reigned over England, Scotland, and Ireland. He was replaced by his daughter Mary II and her husband, William III of Orange, who was the de facto ruler of the Dutch Republic. Historian Jeremy Black suggests it can be seen as both the last successful invasion of England and an internal coup. Despite being Catholic, James became king in February 1685 with widespread support. Many feared that excluding him would lead to a repetition of the tumultuous wars of the Three Kingdoms. However, over the next 3 years, he alienated his supporters by suspending the Scottish and English parliaments in 1685 and ruling by personal decree. Despite this, it was considered a short-term issue, as James was 52 and his childless second marriage after 11 years made his Protestant daughter Mary the heir presumptive. Two events in June 1688 intensified descent into a political crisis. First, the birth of James Francis Edward on 10 June displaced Mary as heir, raising the prospect of a Catholic dynasty. Second, the prosecution of the seven bishops on 15 June, one in a series of perceived assaults on the Church of England, resulted in their acquittal on the 30th, sparking anti-Catholic riots and undermining James's political authority. This combination led a broad coalition of English politicians to invite William to intervene militarily to protect the Protestant religion. With Louis XIV of France planning to attack the Dutch, William saw an opportunity to secure English resources for the 9 Years' War, which began in September 1688. He landed in Brixham in Torbay on 5 November with 14,000 men, and most of the 30,000 strong royal army joined him as he advanced towards London. James went into exile on 23 December, and in April 1689, Parliament declared William and Mary joint monarchs of England and Ireland. A separate but similar settlement was reached in Scotland in June. While the revolution itself was swift and relatively bloodless, post-war revolts in Scotland and Ireland resulted in significant casualties. Jacobitism persisted into the late 18th century, but the revolution ended a century of political dispute by confirming Parliament's primacy over the Crown, a principle established in the Bill of Rights 1689. The Toleration Act of 1688 granted freedom of worship to non-conformist Protestants. However, restrictions on Catholics outlined in the 1678 and 1681 English and Scottish Test Acts remained until 1828. Restrictions on the monarch's choice of spouse were removed in 2015, but those applying to the monarch remain.